Today we are going to discuss attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity or ADHD. Even though there are not communication deficits specifically in ADHD, this is a disorder which often accompanies communication disorders or affects a person's ability to effectively communicate. ADHD is a neurological disorder and typically begins in childhood, even though some people are not diagnosed until adulthood. The three core elemental behaviors are inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Depending on the subtype of ADHD an individual has, he or she will exhibit a combination of these. To be diagnosed with the subtype of hyperactive impulsive ADHD, the individual must exhibit at least 6 of the different diagnostic symptoms of hyperactivity impulsivity. These individuals can have inattentive symptoms also, but not more than 6. For the inattentive subtype, there needs to be at least 6 symptoms of inattention category and fewer than 6 symptoms of hyperactivity impulsivity. Combined hyperactive impulsive inattentive subtype is diagnosed if the individual has 6 or more symptoms of inattention and 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity impulsivity. Most children are diagnosed with this subtype of ADHD. Children with the hyperactive impulsive and combined type have the most difficulty. They have socialization problems. This makes sense. They're more intrusive, aggressive because of the hyperactivity and the impulsiveness. On top of this is the inattentiveness to social cues. ADHD is diagnosed behaviorally by a doctor. To be diagnosed with ADHD by the DSM-5 criteria, one must have at least 6 out of 15 symptoms. These symptoms have to be seen in multiple settings and for at least 6 months. Every child has inattention and hyperactivity at some point in their life, right? The persistence and pervasiveness is required for a diagnosis of ADHD, though. If an individual does not exhibit at least 6 symptoms, their life and functioning will still be affected, but will not be diagnosed with ADHD. So what is the most unifying symptom of all types of ADHD? It is impulsivity, or the performance of actions done without thinking or premeditation. It is definitely the most unifying symptom among the different types of ADHD. I like this quote that was in your book from Arnold in 2002. Patients with the disorder act before they think, react before they think, speak before they think, and even think before they think, jumping to conclusions prematurely. If you know anyone with ADHD, I bet some of these different points there from Arnold really resonated with you. I looked up on the CDC website to get the most up-to-date statistics since your book was published in 2012. According to the CDC, in 2016, approximately 9.4% of children ages 2 to 17, so that's 6.1 million children, had ever been diagnosed with ADHD, according to Parent Report. Ages 2 to 5, approximately 388,000 children were diagnosed. Ages 6 to 11, approximately 2.4 million children were diagnosed. And ages 12 to 17, approximately 3.3 million children. ADHD is twice as more prevalent in males than girls. The prevalence in males is increasing, and the prevalence in females is increasing, though. Now, why do we think that that's happening? Males tend to show more of their behavior than the females. A lot of time, the females are the ones that are sitting there more quietly, just not getting what's going on and maybe not doing the work. And they're daydreaming off and they're off somewhere else, right? So I think we're beginning to pick up on that with the females and doing a better job of making a good diagnosis no matter the person's gender. The family has a lot of issues to deal with when they have a child with ADHD. Having a child in your family can be very disruptive. And then having a child, no, I'm just kidding, but having a child with ADHD can be very disruptive because of the child's behavior. And then having to deal with the issues at school. As practitioners, we need to be very sensitive to this. We have to be mindful of all the dynamics that might be going on. One parent might blame the other parent, or one parent may think you handle it in one way, and the other parent thinks I'll handle it in this way. Um, so there's not, the parents might not always be on the same page for managing the behaviors of a child with ADHD. Also, a lot of times parents feel guilty that they have a child who has this type of problem. Referring parents to support groups can be very helpful for the family, or there are also lots of online resources for the family to help them understand what ADHD is and how it can impact the family and different supports that they have for them. So the etiology of ADHD is unknown. According to the CDC, research shows that genetics definitely plays an important role. In addition to genetics, scientists are studying other possible causes and risk factors, including brain injury, exposure to environmental during pregnancy or at a young age, so example lead, alcohol and tobacco use during pregnancy, premature delivery, and low birth weight. In the next several slides, we're going to look at the three categories of symptoms of ADHD: control and regulation of attention, impulsivity, and activity. And again, this is done by symptoms. We diagnose by behavior, not by some definitive tests such as blood work. So with attention, the issue is controlling the attention. The child can pay attention. They have that ability. So let's think of some examples that I know that you have probably seen. So think some of yours for yourself that you've seen individuals have difficulty paying attention. So I bet all of you gave at least one example, right? There is the child that can pay attention to video games for hours. They can watch a movie with minimal difficulty. Or how about the child who likes to doodle and draw for hours? They can focus, and they can definitely focus on the activity if it is something they're interested in. If it's not something they're interested in, they don't think about controlling their attention. It takes a lot of work for them to pay attention and to control their attention. We've all had times when paying attention has been a real challenge for us. But see what it's like if it's all day long, every day, that you have to control that tension. It's actually very tiring. Research has shown that these individuals have difficulty separating or isolating what's important. Think about a classroom and everything that goes on simultaneously. The door closing may be as important to them as a teacher saying something about what is on the board. Also, think about the teacher explaining a concept. If she is using a lot of language in several examples, if the child has difficulty isolating important information, then he won't be able to know what is important information to remember and what is not. So we will see inappropriate answers. If a child hears a lot of nothing, you can see why they get bored. They will exhibit poor social skills also. The same thing can happen with a friend that happened with the teacher in the example below or before. The friend is telling a story, and the child with ADHD can't get the salient parts of the story or remember certain parts. His friend is going to expect some contingent turn taking on what he said, and the child with ADHD will not be able to meaningfully contribute when it is his turn. Parents will definitely give stories to difficulty organizing and completing tasks. Teachers too, but this is a big one for parents at home, I've definitely seen. This is a daily battle in most families. They also have difficulty learning something new because they do not know what to attend to. When we look at impulsivity, we have to understand executive functioning. Executive functioning skills are housed in the frontal lobe. We will talk about executive functioning in the TBI chapter next, but more. But the executive function is one's ability to organize, plan, sequence, and deal with emotional responses. Impulsivity is an executive functioning skill and is the difficulty in sustaining inhibition or when someone acts before thinking. Individuals will often blurt out answers and say what they're thinking. They may appear more emotional because they will show emotions without restraint. These individuals are also impatient and have difficulty waiting. If the child does wait like he is supposed to, he will forget answers or what he is supposed to do. The last characteristic of impulsivity is interrupting conversations or others' activities. They come off as rude and inconsiderate. They know the social rules, but this impulsivity does not allow them to follow the rules. For the third category, we're going to look at the two subtypes, hyperactivity and inattentiveness, separately. For the individual with ADHD with hyperactivity, he might be the one that fidgets and squirms in a seat, is the motor mouth, and is in constant movement, like walking, touching things, or playing with stuff constantly. For the individual with ADHD with an attentiveness, these individuals may be very quiet and not diagnosed until older. We will see incomplete work even though they are super smart, underachievement, and not having many friends. There are 12 control systems that everyone must develop for internal control and organization. We are going to discuss 7 of those 12 that individuals with ADHD have specific difficulty with. The first is focal control, which is the ability to focus on what is important. We've already discussed examples of focal control that children have in the classroom. Next is mental effort control, is where the individual has to work at concentrating, resulting in mental fatigue because they have to work so hard. In associative control, this is what enables a person to maintain a conversation by stating issues that are relevant to the conversation. They seem very tangential because of difficulties with this control system. Appetite control does not really have anything to do with appetite. It does have to do with delayed gratification. This is important for us as therapists in intervention. Because of this need for instant gratification, telling the child to do good in therapy and he will get a sticker at the end of therapy just does not work. We see that we have to break down the tasks into smaller parts and give small reinforcers after each one of these parts. So like maybe I give them a token after every 5 tasks that they do. And then when they get a certain number, then he gets that sticker. So do a good job for a long time and then get a reward does not work for these kids. And that appetite control here that they're talking about, this ability for delayed gratification is the reason. Behavior control is the impulsivity and the poor or disorganized central nervous system. Affective control is the inappropriate effect and expression of emotions. Finally, is quality control is which person's ability to provide an explanation for his or her own actions. I think you recognize most of these from descriptions of the three categories of symptoms, but it helps us understand why they do certain behaviors that they do. A team approach is the best in diagnosing ADHD because there should be differential diagnosis, which is best done by multiple disciplines. A psychologist or diagnostician will diagnose if a diagnosis occurs by the school. A psychiatrist is usually on a medical-based assessment team, but is quickly brought in if not on the initial team because many individuals with ADHD receive medications to help control the symptoms. The SLP is on the team to determine presence of language disorders. An audiologist is even sometimes brought in to look at hearing acuity, of course, and if auditory processing needs to be assessed. The parents and teachers are definitely part of the team and will fill out a lot of behavioral checklists. During the SLP's testing, the clinician is going to look at the individual's language approach. One thing we will definitely note is if the child continues to ask for repetition on test items. The child will be asked a question and he sits there a second and then says, "Repeat that, please." And then it is repeated and the child asks again that you repeat it. When this has occurred with me during testing, I will mark something like an R or some kind of notation next to every question that the child asks for repetition to see if I see a pattern in this behavior. And then, of course, the clinician will document any impulsivity, like when the child starts answering before given the entire question. This happens a whole lot. Lastly, the clinician should make observation on the individual's conversational skills. Characteristics to note are if the child will not stay on topic, the ability to repair conversation if it breaks down, or how many number of turns do they take in a conversation. Here are the areas that are assessed during evaluation for ADHD. First is cognition. How does the child learn? Is the child an auditory or are they a visual learner? Next is how does the child process information? Auditory or visual? Is the child better when he sees it or when he hears it? Next, achievement testing will be completed. Basically, what are the child's academic abilities? And then for language, the SLP will especially look at the meta skills because they are more abstract and require more attention to understand. Can the child think? Can he figure out when he's not understanding something and how he is not understanding it? Does he understand how he thinks and how he problem solves? And then, of course, the pragmatics. How does the child use the language and how aware is the child of how he uses language? That is the meta of pragmatics. Then there is the attention control. The team is looking for how well the child can control his attention. Behavioral observation is what does one see when the child is observed in his different environments. These would include everything we have been talking about: impulsivity, fidgeting, a motor mouth, or constant movement. The team is also going to want to look at all of the current and past medical history. They will want to look at any current or previous medications as well as any medical conditions. Lastly, the team will want to see how the child interacts with others. Are there any of the social dynamics that often accompany a diagnosis of ADHD? A child might do very well with the clinician one-on-one in a quiet setting, but put into the playground, does the child become overwhelmed? Do they openly interact with the other children, or do they hold back from the group? For the management of ADHD, we're going to look at these 5 things: academic issues, memory deficits, behavioral issues, medical issues, and social issues. Once the child has a diagnosis and you know the child's strengths and weaknesses through the assessment, then the team will begin looking into these issues in all of the child's environments. Once we get an idea of how the ADHD is affecting academics, a plan is set in place which best supports the child for learning. Completing all of the required work can be a big problem for these kids. Shorter assignments are often a modification, and then breaking an assignment into smaller parts is another. These children need large projects or assignments broken into specific steps for them. To help with organization, I have seen assignment notebooks in which the child writes down what they have to complete, and then the teacher checks that they have completed each part. This is where I have seen teachers break down, though, too. They will give the child the notebook and make sure the child writes down what is needed to be done, but does not follow up to make sure the child has the materials that he needs to complete the assignment, or did they follow up at the end and look and see if it was completed? And were all the parts of the assignment completed? These children often need someone to help organize their desk and their backpacks also. I see again, the teachers might help them, the first several weeks and then not touch base with them for months. And really, they need regular monitoring and help and support with this. For the management of memory issues, the team needs to look at the child's ability in each of these areas which can contribute to memory problems. First is selective attention, which is the ability to focus on what is important. Focused attention, which is the ability to complete a specific activity, often under a time constraint. Sustained attention is the ability to complete an activity, but more over time than what is required with focused attention. Divided attention is the ability to determine how much attention should be given to each activity. And lastly is vigilance, which is the ability to complete the whole task without falling behind. This is needed to develop a memory bank. When you think back on these, it is easy to see how each will affect a child's functional memory. Remember that ADHD is not a behavior management problem, even though it is problematic. This means that we have to figure out the core root of the behavior we are seeing and determine which ADHD symptom or control system is driving that behavior. Then we choose the proper intervention for that control system or ADHD symptom. Even though the child is not intentionally meaning to be a behavior problem, the child does have to learn that he is ultimately the one responsible for his actions. The adults around him have to teach him to take responsibility, but at the same time, not shame him for that behavior. Again, it is about knowing which ADHD symptoms are the most problematic and proactively organize the child's world to help support his functioning and meet the demands of his environments. Like we've already discussed, having visual checklists or breaking down the activity into small steps are good supports for these kids. you like my pictures of the Post-it notes, that's definitely one of my compensatory strategies. How about you? Next is medical intervention. There are many medications out there that can help with the different symptoms of ADHD. So the attention, the impulsivity, and the activity. The most common, Ritalin's been out there forever. Adderall, Concerta. There are definitely many, many others out there on the market that help with these three different areas in different ways. The family has to work with the psychiatrist or the prescribing doctor to figure out which is the best for the child. Um, I've figured out from personal experience with my son, it's often try one, wait and wait for a long time and see what changes, what good effects or bad effects, and then maybe change and try another one. It's kind of a game. The medication game is what I call it. Lastly, we want to make sure that the child's social needs are a part of the intervention plan. As soon as they're old enough to understand, a child should be educated on ADHD, what it is, and understand how it impacts him so that he can use his metacognitive skills to take responsibility and start managing his own behavior and attention. Social skills groups are a good way to work on some of the issues because the child can relate to the other children in the group as well as see some of their behaviors and learn from their behaviors. This will also often help them understand their own behaviors better, of course. So this completes the chapter on ADHD. The SLP audiologist has many individuals with ADHD on their caseload, definitely. So hopefully this chapter will have helped you understand their behaviors better and know how to best respond to these behaviors and help support the individual.